All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Vetted Podcast. We are on episode 22 and couldn't be happier to have a guest on today that we were a guest on a part of with the webinar vet, Dr. Anthony Chadwick, coming out of Liverpool. How are you today?
Hey, I'm really good. It's dark where we are. We're obviously 6 hours ahead of you, and we've got a
Yes.
storm coming in. So it's a case of, I think you would say, hunkering down for the weekend.
Yeah. And you're more north than us, so you have less daylight probably than us, too, I would
Yes.
imagine, hours of the day.
Well, at this stage of the year, it gets light about 8:30 in the morning, and then it goes dark about 3:30, 4 o'clock. So we're approaching that winter solstice very quickly, getting to the shortest day.
Yes. Yeah, we are. Yeah, we're complaining about, about 7 to 5 right now.
Yeah,
Seven to
7 to 5:30
Yeah,
probably.
yeah. So it's not, we have a lot more, but for us, yeah, we'd whine. So if we're in Liverpool, we might be, might whining more. We're whiners out here in Missouri, though. We're in a state called the Show Me State, and so we just have everybody's got to prove us something. So, all kidding aside, we got Kale Flaspohler as always on my co-host here. Got Lindo working the tech behind here and getting that going, and we've got Kelsey in here too, which Kelsey's observing and learning how to do all this fun stuff. So make sure we have backup, redundancy, and we got a great team. So thanks for the team. Thanks to listeners always. And hey, we're going to dive right in. I think that as we pre-gamed the talk today, you brought up some pretty neat things. But before we get into that, is talk about your history, your path to. I think I said at 8 years old, you knew you want to be a veterinarian, right?
Yeah.
It was all the way back to then.
It was Steve. It was a little baby sparrow. I was playing on the yard in All Saints School where I went to in Liverpool, and one of my friends stepped on a baby sparrow by accident.
Okay.
Unfortunately, killed it. And I thought, well, if I'd have been a vet, maybe I could have saved it. So
That's
yeah, we've got to be careful with language because, of course, a vet in America means something different than it means here. But
right.
veterinarian. So qualified
Veterinarians,
in
that's right.
1990, didn't fall far from the tree, stayed in Liverpool.
Hmm.
And then traveled a little bit, went into Wales, did some large animal practice, but then gravitated back into Liverpool, working in small animal practice, a special interest in dermatology. So I did
Okay.
some referrals in dermatology, and then also had a first opinion practice. In about, I think it was about 2008, 2009, I moved my practice up the road, spent a lot of money on buying two buildings, pushing them together, made a really nice practice. But then a year later, I was very interested in all the internet and very interested in how can we be more a better digital business.
Hmm.
I'd been doing things like there was this new thing that had come out called Google pay per click. So I was very quickly onto that, and I was getting people visiting my website, vets in Liverpool, paying for that, 4 or 5 pence a click. And then Yellow Pages. Do you remember Yellow Pages, or are you both too young to remember
Oh no,
that
I
I remember
big
the yellow
yellow
pages.
yeah,
Oh
book
yeah.
that used to come in?
yeah.
And they came to me because, of course, we all at that stage put our adverts in Yellow Pages. I think Yellow Pages, I don't even know if they print it anymore, but it's gone very, I think it's yell.com now.
Right.
So they came in and they said, well, we can put you on the top of Google for £3,000 a year. And I said, well, it's costing me 5 pence a click at the moment. So I think I'll just continue to take the top spot. So I was always interested in the internet and the possibilities of it. And I went to an internet conference in 2010, partly to see how I could, develop the things we were already doing. But I met this great guy called Stephen Esser, who was an Australian, and he was talking about webinars. And I thought, why are we not using this in the veterinary profession? Nobody was using it as far as I was aware. And so I teamed up with Stephen, and he helped me set up a website. Within 5 weeks, I'd done my first ever webinar. I offered it to my dermatology clients, and I talked about itchy dogs for an hour. And at the end of that, I had two practices. I made an offer of saying, I'll go into your practice a month apart and I'll teach you dermatology. And I had two practices signed up. So I went to bed that night and thought, I think I've probably made about £4,000 from the first ever webinar I've done. So I thought there's something in this.
Yeah.
And then I went up to BSAVA, which is our big small animal conference in Birmingham then. And I walked around all the stands, the Hills, the Boweringers, the Royal Cannons, all of the stands, and I said to them, you should be doing webinars. And they all said, what's a webinar?
The big
So at that
companies.
stage, it's, and it's an important story to tell because in some ways, if a vet's qualified 10 years now, they probably think webinars have always been there. But actually, we were kind of the first company, as far as I'm aware. Please tell me if I'm wrong. Come on the podcast or
Well, you
leave
could
a
say the second
comment.
company. You could say the second company because no one's going to argue with you about that one. You know.
Yeah. But we were there in March 2010, and the business grew very quickly because, of course, my pain was it was really difficult to do your training. We all have to do a certain number of hours to stay current as a vet.
Right.
Often in many countries it's a requirement. I know in the States it's different for each state. What the requirements are.
Yes.
But the old-fashioned way was you had finished an evening clinic. It was 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. You jumped in your car, you drove 30 miles to a hotel. A company was often putting on an hour of CPD. There was an inadequate buffet. You listened to the CPD for an hour. You had maybe a shandy or a Coke in the bar with some friends, and then you went home. But it was midnight by the time you got home. And of course, the next day you were back on that hamster wheel. Or, you spent a lot of money going to a conference in another state, or, in the UK, maybe down in London, you'd have to pay for hotels, you'd have to pay for the actual transport. Of course, you were away from your practice, so you maybe had to get a locum in to cover for that. So I at the time thought, the training for me to stay current every year was costing me probably £5,000 in real terms. And here we were creating something which, for a fraction of that cost, allowed people to get all of their training and not only do the 35 hours that we had to do in the UK, but actually, if it's really good quality and you do 70 hours or 100 hours, you become a better vet or a better vet tech. You also fall back in love with the profession. You're more enthusiastic, you're more confident when you go in. And of course, the clients recognize that and you get more clients. So I think prioritizing education keeps us all fresh. If we get to a stage where we think we know it all, then that's when we're, beginning to die inside professionally, at least. So being a lifelong learner is something I've always tried to do, and hopefully we've made it a bit easier since 2010 by taking that training online rather than people having to travel for it.
And so you're talking 2010. How was the adoption pre-COVID? You got a whole decade, right? Coming out of a recession, global recession, right? Because the United States kicked off a large global recession in 8 and 9. And so you're 2010 innovating there, coming out. Yeah, talked about the the adoption rate, and also how'd you get all the material out there? That's a lot, a lot of hours to be able to have for
Yeah,
CPD.
we've got about 3,000 hours on the site now. So I see
Wow.
the site as like a veterinary encyclopedia. We've put a lot of money and time into improving the site. It's now available in 22 different languages.
Wow.
So people can watch the webinar in English and then take the subtitles in the different languages. We kind of done that a bit purposely because actually, if you can hear the English but then see your own language in translation, it actually helps your English. And of course, the scientific language is English, isn't it? It's probably the first language,
Right.
the scientific language. So it helps vets in other countries, one, to get better at their English, but also, we're incredibly fortunate in the UK and US. We probably have the best veterinary schools in the world, Australia. There's obviously a lot of good universities, but in some countries, the standard isn't as high. So if we can export that into those countries, help the vets to become better in those countries and the nurses, the technicians, then obviously they'll be looking after the animals better. And that's kind of why I think most of us become vets in the first place, because we care about the animals and, of course, the people who own the animals. From an adoption perspective, it took off very quickly because, as I say, it was touching a pain point, and the pain point was this: having to travel. It was expensive. A lot of the companies charged a lot of money for training. It took time away from family as well. So we now have probably 75, 80,000 vets and nurses on the platform who are
Great.
using, on a regular basis, interacting with our emails and our social media and
Assume that's
so on.
around the world, global.
Yeah, very
Global.
much. Obviously, quite a lot, about a tenth of the actual training is race accredited, and we're trying to
Okay.
increase that all the time. So
Okay.
that's an American system that
Right.
the American veterinarians listening will know about. It does
Absolutely.
take a bit of time. We're fortunate in the UK, and we can perhaps talk about regulation later on in the podcast, but the Royal College is our regulator, and they say, look, you put some training out. If people go to it and they continue to go to it, then the quality is there, because not many businesses survive 15 years. So we're
No.
still here 15 years later. We must be doing something right.
Absolutely.
So we've found that speakers came to us. We chatted at first to some vets, professors at universities, and they liked the sound of it because, of course, I remember the dean of Cambridge Vet School is a good mate of mine, and he came on one of our first webinars that we did, and he said to me at the end, "Gosh, for me to come up to Liverpool from Cambridge, give a talk one evening, and then go home, it takes 2 days out of their lives as well."
Mm-hmm.
So it was working for the speakers in that they could walk upstairs to their study, give an hour of training, walk downstairs, and they're back with family, or watching the television or reading or whatever they wanted to do. So it worked for the veterinarians and for the technician nurses. It was working for the speakers. And then, of course, early doors, we went to some of the big companies and we said, we can get you 1,000 people in a room.
Yeah.
And they said, well, if we get 50 at a hotel, we're doing well.
Yeah.
So it took off. And of course, now, many of the companies do their own webinars, but it's actually interesting in the surveys we do. People say, well, we trust you more because you're independent, as opposed to, a food company or a pharma company. People expect that somewhere down the line they're going to be asked to buy something.
Right.
So, and obviously, a more limited choice of webinars as well. So we have 3,000 on the site. A percentage
That's
of those
wonderful.
are free. But what's really interesting, and I think it was one of your great founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, said, he said, the best thing you can do is to pour your purse into your head, because an investment on yourself is never wasted.
Absolutely.
And we've actually found that when people spend money with us, the net promoter score goes from 40 to 60. So the net promoter is how likely are you to recommend us to your friends
Yeah.
and your colleagues. So actually, once people's come on and spend a bit of money, see the quality of the content, if you like, behind the paywall, and much more likely to recommend us than people who are just doing the free webinars.
That's fabulous. I think that what you've done there is needed, and I love the independent part, not biased, not because a company, they're going to be somewhat well intentioned, but at the end of the day, they make money by selling their product, and so they gotta wind that in some way, and that can be salesy and hard to do. So that's wonderful. So you've got that. How much of your time does that take? You got a lot every week going into that. You got a good crew behind you.
Yeah, we do probably 3 or 4 webinars a week. So we will do webinars on obviously small animal medicine and surgery, do a lot on exotics, so guinea pigs, rabbits, that sort of thing, cattle, large animal sheep, equine. We also, I think, fairly early, I'm a vet with over 25 years of clinical experience, and being a good clinician is important, but actually part of the job is you have to deal with people, as well. So, and I think it's, I did 25 years in practice, and I think it's one of the best jobs in the world. There's very few jobs when you tell people what you do, almost universally, then they then go, "Oh, that's so lovely. You're a vet or veterinarian. That's an amazing job." And people love then talking about their animals. So almost invariably, the second question is, "My dog's got a sore foot. Can you have a look at it for me?" So we're very fortunate. And, I obviously know there's a retention problem amongst the profession in the UK, also in America. And there are obviously some issues there, but I think we also have to recognize what a fabulous job we've got. And if we demonstrate that by showing gratitude, if you go into work thinking this is one of the best places to work, it actually becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy as well. So I kind of sometimes worry that we talk ourselves into depression and into negativity. Whereas I think if you
Right.
go with a positive mindset into your business every day, people will recognize that. They'll probably be more likely to want to come and visit and bring their dogs to you. It's fascinating. You know, I had a practice in Liverpool, and I remember somebody, you know, talking to me and saying, "Oh, I've got loads of clients who are, you know, pains in the proverbial."
Yeah.
And I said, "Do you know what? I've got really lovely clients."
You can
And then,
say ass on here if you want. You can say it's okay. You can say
yeah.
ass on here.
As I reflected on it, I think for me, one of my maxims in life is if you treat people well, on the whole, they'll treat you back well.
Yes.
And so a lot of problems when we see problems with clients, and if there's lots of problems, we have to kind of look at ourselves rather than look at the idiot clients that we've got, because maybe they're not idiots.
Yes. Well, so on your webinars, do you get into mindset and,
Yeah,
you
so
know,
we did a lot on mindfulness. You know, how do you stay calm? You know, the job can be hectic, but actually, you know, if you can have a positive mindset, if you can look at, you know, how you can run your practice better. So obviously, we do a lot of practice management webinars as well. Obviously, we talk a lot about sustainability, because how do we make our practices be seen as a force for good from an environmental perspective as well? Can we, you know, encourage people in our area to have a wildflower meadow? Can we watch how we deal with our plastic waste?
yeah.
If there's a potential for having solar panels on the roof of your practice, does that then encourage others? I know there's differences in the UK and America. I've had
Sure.
panels on my roof for the last 18 years. I did it because it was something I'm passionate about. And, you know, I spend half the money on electricity now than I did before I had them. So I get a return on investment probably about 20% a year. And that makes business sense as well. So I think there's a lot of stuff now going on also environmentally. And as vets, we should be part of the solution to environmental crisis. I was looking at a recent report from the World Wild Fund for Nature, and I was born in '66, and this survey that they've done covers from 1970 to 2020. And they say that the number of wild animals has decreased by 73% in that time. So to put that into perspective, for every 100 animals that existed, you know, of different types, 50 years ago, there's now only about 23 of those left. So
You're saying there's been extinction, right? So what you're saying is extinction, not that you've gone from 100 of these animals to 27 of them.
yeah,
Or, you know, 100 population to 27
yeah,
population. You've gone from 100 species to 27
No,
species.
I think he's saying total population, because
it's
I see
no
the same thing
population. Yeah,
in the specifically migratory bird, you know, of all types. You know, in America, that's a major one. You know, if they do those counts the same way here, and it's substantial over the last 30 or 40 years. How many fewer of a particular species type there are? I don't know. I have the exact statistics, but it's not far off of what you said, Anthony.
But you
yeah,
so two points though. Population has decreased, but also
yes,
extinction.
yeah, and there
We've
definitely
had
have
mass
been
extinction in
extinctions
the animal
in
kingdom.
the last 50 years. I have tell a story about sparrows, because I did a talk in the 80s. I used to do exams on public speaking, and at the time I was very keen, as I, you know, still am, on conservation issues. And there was a sparrow that lived in Florida called the dusky seaside sparrow, and I was writing about it because it was in danger of extinction. It now doesn't exist anymore. So in that 40 years period, we've lost, and, you know, it's a little brown bird. Is that important? Well, you know,
Sure it
from
is.
my perspective, I I get very sad when I hear that a species that was there doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, that happens at the same time, in the
Take
UK.
a wheel off your car and see if it'll run. It'll still drive down the road. I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, take a
We
spark
lack
plug out.
something, don't we,
Take a
once we
spark plug out.
take the wheel away.
Yeah, it's a
But
big
we've
deal.
lost about 30 million sparrows here in the UK over the last 50 years. But, also I'm a man of hope, and I do a lot in my little plot of land, little garden that I have in the front. And for the last 2 or 3 years, I've seen the sparrows coming back into
Hmm.
my garden. That I've lived in this house 17 years, and I'd not seen them really up until that point. So
Okay.
I think there's also a lot as vets that we can really do, and we can turn a lot of these problems around, but we need to put effort and thought into it.
Well, I
So
tell
we
you
talk
what.
about that on the webinar, and of course, as you mentioned, you've got a podcast. You were very kind to come onto my podcast as well to talk about a lot of business issues
Yeah.
as we did on the podcast.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It was a lot of fun, and I think, like we said before, we've got a lot to talk about. All three of us, and we need to find more time to do these, to share perspectives and viewpoints. And what's interesting is you talked about differences between the UK and United States. They're set up different, government, how regulation is, and all those things, and how you mentioned the United States is more decentralized than the United Kingdom, and it's sheer landmass, right? I mean, number one, what the country was founded on was independence of you do what you want to do. Basically, that's what it was founded on. It was founded straight on. I want to run my business how I want to run it. Keep the government out of my house. That's what this
Yeah,
country was founded
yeah,
on.
and I think that's been probably seen in your latest election is that big versus small government, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's perception.
Yeah,
It's actually all it is nowadays is perception. It's what can you even comprehend and understand. And what I want to get back to those commonality though we have as people, right? I mean, we both are facing the same existential things we talked about, and Kale, you mentioned it. It's that we can see it in nature, right? And veterinarians can have a big impact and have what a passion to have. Not only care for the animals, but they care for the environment.
Oh
Veterinarians
yeah, well,
need it.
healthy animals mean healthy ecosystem. Clean water, all kinds of things that stem from that. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, one
we
of the
talk,
things, Anthony,
talk
if
a lot
you,
about One Health as well, and One Health is very much humans, animals, and planet.
Yeah.
And often, if we affect one, we're going to affect the other one. So it
Mm-hmm.
is having a more holistic approach, which is why I'm also not keen when everybody just talks about carbon and the climate crisis and
Yeah.
global warming and is it or
Well,
isn't it?
well,
Actually, we just got to look at it holistically, and seeing signs like the birds are reducing in
mm-hmm.
number.
Well, like the Three Gorges Dam,
Yeah,
it affected the tilt of the Earth axis. I mean,
right.
that's insane,
Yeah,
right? The things that affects the whole world, not just China's power,
yes.
consumption, right? But I'm sure the amount of impact it had. There's probably species over there that went extinct that we didn't even know about when they did that. So
Yeah,
yeah, a lot goes on. That's not a political issue. What comes down to it, or it's a global coming together. And wow, I think that's really neat. That I think about that with veterinarians. That, yeah, what a neat opportunity to most people love animals, right? I mean, it's hard not to love a cat and a dog, or go to the zoo and be amazed by an animal, and it could be a joining force. So
it could be.
yeah,
So one of the things that I was hoping to get you to talk a little bit about, Anthony, is because you do travel to so many places and you have such a perspective on the way different countries do things. Is like so if I go to the vet here and I do go to a private clinic or an independently owned clinic, and I go to one, say in your town there in the UK. Is it going to feel very similar to me, or am I going to notice differences in those things? Or would you talk a little bit about maybe what the difference might be? I'm just curious. I think it's an
great
interesting
question.
thought.
yeah. No, it's a great question. It's really interesting. I had an old mentor called John Tandy, and he went in the '60s over to America just to look at what you were doing and all the hospitals that you had, and very much. I think you've always led the way. We obviously look to America. We go to conferences. The American speakers are always fantastic speakers. So the quality is I think really high in America. I think there are differences, and I was kind of surprised by this, but of course we're much more corporatized now. We've got about 5 or 6 groups in the UK, which are spilling into Europe as well. So, corporate practices in Europe as well. And there've been some positives to that. It brings in people from outside the profession, and I think sometimes, both of you have come from outside the profession.
Right.
It's really important that we can learn from people with a different perspective, because often what happens is a vet is good at his job. He or she is busy, and then he thinks, oh, well, I'll open a practice, or I'll get another vet in, and then I'll get 2 nurses and I'll get a receptionist. And suddenly he's become a business owner, or she has. And learning the skills of that can be quite different, because of course we're not taught that in university. We're taught how to actually treat dogs and cats and other animals. So we have to we can either try and learn all of that ourselves and become accountants and created spreadsheets, or we get clever people like you in, and that helps us to become more profitable, etc., etc. So I think corporatization can help in bringing people in from other professions who can make sure that we're having a wider perspective on life. But obviously, at the moment in the UK, the corporates are also starting to struggle. Prices have gone up. We have some veterinary redundancy going on in the UK as well. We've obviously also got people who are leaving the profession. I know you have that issue as well. So I was quite surprised coming over to America to really discover that whilst corporatization is happening, it's actually behind where the UK is, where UK is probably at 70 odd percent, whereas I think America, I was hearing 20-30% as being corporatized. So I think it's good to have a mixture. There's been a lot of vets in our country who've been made very wealthy by a corporate coming in and buying them when they were getting close to retirement age. If there was no succession plan, potentially that practice would close when the person got too old to run it. So I think that's significant. The other, I think, interesting thing, which again I always get a bit surprised about, is the level of insurance in the UK, in Europe, and America. Obviously, America, you need to have private health insurance for your own self. So I always kind of presumed that you would have quite a lot of your pets insured, but I don't think that really happens. Whereas obviously in the UK and Europe, there's much higher levels of insurance.
Well, it's a different our health insurance system, until the ACA, Obamacare, was all independent. A lot of people didn't have health insurance. It didn't make it a priority, and that's versus in Europe, where the social network of support for health and those things, insurance is an acceptable deal. So that was more accepted in the psyche, I think, of Europeans to think, you're going to get health insurance for your animal. But in the United States, you're like, I can. It's $2,000 a year for that insurance. I'm only going to spend $1,000 on my animal. I'm gonna take the risk. I don't get an $8,000 bill. And most people, that's risk averse in the United States, right? Or risk tolerant, I should say. There's more risk tolerance to say, I'll roll the dice on this thing. So,
and we don't see, in fairness, many poor insurance companies. So it is obviously they know their numbers, don't they? And they know what sort of claims they're going to get, and they work their their subscription levels on that basis.
Yeah, and you need a large pool in insurance to be successful at the end of the day, and they don't have that yet. You saw Nationwide down at when we were at AVMA in Austin, 250,000 policies, they just quit insuring, got out of the business. So it's interesting. That's a big difference for sure.
Yeah, has to be. Those. So one of the things that keeps coming up, in our meetings, and it's getting more and more prevalent every year, is the use of AI in appointments, in exam rooms, scheduling, predictive scheduling, all kinds of things that are happening. And I know you know a little bit about that, and so could you maybe speak on that and how it relates to profit in a clinic too?
Yeah, I'd probably go back a little step and say we had a Vet Futures thing that came from the Royal College. What does the veterinary profession look like? And this was probably in about 2015. I remember the CEO at the time saying every business had to be a digital business. And it kind of struck me because obviously we were very much online. But he actually meant that, a veterinary practice should be a digital business as well. A kitchen, a butcher, baker, and a candlestick maker, they should all be digital businesses. And I think, I carried that conversation on in podcasts and webinars that we were doing and, in LinkedIn posts and blog posts. And to a large extent was probably, very little attention was paid to it. And then this tiny little virus, the coronavirus, came around and everybody suddenly realized, what happens if we can't meet physically? We have to be able to get around that. And so digital businesses or businesses became digitally enabled. So your business that was maybe a restaurant suddenly decided it could take orders online and deliver food to people's houses, and the Deliveroos and everything obviously massively increased in that time. And similarly, with us suddenly, I remember very early on in the pandemic, we had the World Veterinary Association came to us and they said, we're holding our event in Auckland in April 2020. New Zealand has closed down. The airports are no longer open. We're going to lose hundreds of thousands of pounds because we've ordered, we've booked this big conference centre, and actually all our sponsors are pulling out because they can't have booths and things. So over a kind of about a month, we developed a 3-week festival of learning for vets, all over the world. And actually we tripled the number of attendees that were going to this event because suddenly it was online rather than you had to go to Auckland, which is a very far way away for almost everybody.
Yes.
And we saved them a lot of money, and they probably made a small profit rather than a huge loss. And we ended up doing a lot of those events. And what I felt at the time was we were ready. If you want to use a 100-meter race, we were actually on the start line and we were in the crouched position ready to go. And there were some companies that hadn't even got into the changing room.
Okay.
So I think, I'd said at the time, if you're not a digital business, will you survive in 10 years? But actually the pandemic massively shortened that, and many businesses went out of business because they suddenly couldn't see people.
Mm-hmm.
And then things like, your appointment apps came in where you could book automatically. These things were already there. They just weren't being used by people.
Right.
And people were using Facebook more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think what's happened certainly over the last couple of years is I'm going to change that and say you need to be an AI business to survive. And it's really interesting. A lot of stuff being written about AI. Harvard Business Review, if you're not a Harvard Business Review reader,
Sure. Yeah, no,
it's well worth
absolutely.
looking at because they've done a lot of articles on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they talked about that there's a worry that AI is going to take all our jobs away. And I think if we don't look at retraining, that could happen. But actually, most AI works best when it augments somebody rather than when it automates and removes them.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in human medicine, they know that they're not going to use AI to do prescriptions because you have a thing called confabulation where the AI can get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And if you dose somebody 10 times the dose of a heart medication, you could kill them. So in that case, having something that says, right, we know what medication you're saying and here's the dose rate, but you need to check it. Having somebody alongside, I think, is important.
Yes.
So what we found in our business, and it was really interesting, a couple of months ago, I went out to the whole team and I said, are you using AI in the business? And it was amazing how many of them were. Now, we hadn't said they couldn't or they could, but I think it allowed people to have that experimental side where they were going out using ChatGPT to help them with reports on things. And what we're trying to do now is to bring that much more into a kind of framework so we know when we should use it and when we shouldn't. And certainly, AI's helped massively with our project to take the site into 22 languages now. So I think if people can look at it, as vets, as vet nurses, to have somebody alongside of them that's like a part-time junior assistant, I think that very easily this can increase productivity by 20%, if not more. So if people aren't looking at things like ChatGPT, then certainly they should be. And now, of course, there are businesses that we see that are AI powered. So we did a webinar recently, which was a webinar all about burnout and so on, but it was sponsored by a company called Covet, which are a Canadian company, and they're actually using AI to record the consultations that people have in their consulting room, and then to automatically take that and actually stick that onto the practice management system. So instead of me having to type that, which takes 10 minutes after the appointment, or I have my back turned to the client, or I'm not totally focused on the client and the animal, to take that out and, remove maybe the bits where you're talking about the latest football scores, etc., but to put the clinical records in, to then be able to send that clinical record out to the client with the recommendations that you made. Because I always used to write down recommendations, because clients would walk out and they'd go to the receptionist and say, I'm not really sure what I should be doing.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's written down, if it's emailed over to them, that can save so much time. You can see that the kind of benefit of this time saving for vets who are time poor. Perhaps now I so often hear a 5-vet practice saying we've only got 3 vets. Now the simple answer is we'll find another 2, but good luck with that. Actually, we've got to look at how do we use our vet techs better? How do we use tools, digital tools, to save time and make us more productive? So I think if veterinary practice can think of, there are tools out there, how do we use them so that they can save us time? Some of those will be very much AI powered, some of them will just be digital tools, but actually the more that we can embrace, also helping with diagnosis. There's 10 different conditions here, how are you going to rule these out? There is so much information now that if we try and keep that all in our brain, it's basically it's impossible.
Yeah, that's what IBM Watson set out to do in the medical industry, human medical industry for sure. And, I think with AI is what you said earlier about people, like they say, these clients are always grumpy. Well, are the clients grumpy or is the veterinarian grumpy? And AI is the same way. How you want to choose to address it from a negative standpoint or a positive standpoint? Yeah. And you have to do that with anything you approach. If you come at it negative, AI is not going to work for you. If you come at it positive, it's going to work for you. And the other thing you said too, it's like that 5-doctor practice says they only have 3 doctors. Well, no, you have the resources in house. You're just not being resourceful with your resources. So this is a great way to be resourceful with your resources. So I love getting on with, I'm calling you a friend. We're making a good relationship here, and I enjoy talking to you. But talking to people that embrace tech, because that's one thing that from a young age I was able to get involved with, and always, I used to be on the cutting edge or ahead of it, which would get you in trouble to a degree because you're always adopting new things. So there's also a fine line with AI and tech is to understand you don't have to be the first adopter. You need to be an early adopter, but maybe not the pioneer of it all. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I'm glad you're embracing it.
And I talk a lot about R&D in our company, and people think that I mean research and development, and I don't. I mean rip off and duplicate. I didn't create webinars. Webinars were just in another profession, but we hadn't looked out for that.
Right.
So similarly with AI, there are companies doing amazing things already. We should be able to go in and cherry pick what we like and what we don't like. But as I'd said with, if you're not a digital business, you won't be around in 10 years. I do think if you're not an AI-driven business, you are going to struggle to compete as other businesses use this as well.
Well, I think that's as we approach end of our time today. What's the future? It's we have the resources. We have to be resourceful. That's at the end of the day. We got to quit blaming other people. We got to be resourceful. The things are out there. You got to go after them and do them. And things like the webinar vet allow people to see what's available, what's out there. Get your CE, do those things, which is phenomenal. So I look forward to working with you more on the webinar vet too, because I think there's some collaboration and things that can happen there that just make a lot of sense. So that's exciting. So we've got a good message to get out, and you do too, and we'll continue to get that viewpoint out there so people can be successful and get things online in their house and be educated without having to be away from their family. So we're all on the same page. So anything more you want to add today before we close out?
No, it's just great to speak to you. As it's always good to hear different perspectives from different places as well, and it's always good to talk, isn't it? So I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come and speak on the podcast, and it's been a lot of fun.
There's been a lot of fun, and gosh, I'm looking at so many things we're going to talk about over the coming years together, and share and grow and learn. So thank you for the that belief in lifelong learning. We have the same beliefs. I can tell that. There's just different ways countries go about it, but we got the same goals, and I love to see that. So Dr. Anthony Chadwick with the Webinar Vet, thank you so much for being on today, and we'll put your link up to the podcast that you have also and everything when we release this podcast. So, hey, please like and subscribe our podcast. If there's any questions you have, please let us know. We're always up for, hey, if you thought something we said wasn't right, hey, we're about perspectives. Let us know. We should be able to have good candor with each other and have loving responses. So thank you so much for your time.
Peace and blessings.